Sarah Chen stared at her reflection in the bedroom mirror, her trembling fingers adjusting the dark brown wig that perfectly matched her natural hair color from 4 years ago. The early morning sunlight streaming through her window highlighted every detail of the synthetic hair, making her worry that others might notice it wasn't real. "It's just another school, Sarah. You can do this," she whispered to herself, trying to calm the butterflies in her stomach. At 16, she was starting her junior year at Westbrook High School, her third school in 4 years. Each move brought the same anxieties, the same fears of being discovered. Her journey with alopecia began when she was 12. It started with small patches of hair loss, which her mother initially dismissed as stress from middle school. But within 6 months, Sarah had lost almost all her hair, including her eyebrows and eyelashes. The doctors explained it was an autoimmune condition called alopecia universalis, where the body attacks its own hair follicles. The sound of footsteps in the hallway pulled Sarah from her thoughts. Her mother, Lisa Chen, appeared in the doorway, already dressed in her nurse's scrubs for the early shift at the local hospital. "Ready for your first day, honey?" Lisa asked, her eyes filled with concern. She had moved them to this new town for a better job opportunity, hoping it would also give Sarah a fresh start. Sarah nodded, though her hands wouldn't stop shaking as she applied the adhesive to her eyebrows. These small strips of hair, carefully crafted to look natural, had become part of her morning routine. She had become an expert at applying them, just as she had mastered the art of drawing perfect eyeliner to disguise her missing lashes. "I made your favorite breakfast," Lisa said, trying to lighten the mood. "Blueberry pancakes with extra syrup, just the way you like them." The mention of food made Sarah's stomach turn, but she forced a smile. Her mother had enough to worry about, working double shifts to pay for Sarah's treatments and high-quality wigs. The least she could do was pretend everything was fine. Downstairs in their modest kitchen, Sarah picked at her pancakes while her mother reviewed the day's schedule. "Remember, your appointment with Dr. Roberts is at 4, Lisa reminded her. "Mrs. Thompson from next door will drive you since I'll still be at work." Sarah nodded again, her mind already wandering to what awaited her at Westbrook High. Her last school hadn't been too bad until Jessica Monroe discovered her secret. The whispers had started slowly, then spread like wildfire. Within weeks, Sarah had gone from being relatively invisible to becoming the girl everyone stared at in the hallways. This time would be different, she told herself. She had a better wig now, more natural-looking eyebrows, and years of experience keeping her condition hidden. Plus, she had convinced her mother to let her join the school newspaper. Maybe focusing on writing would help her make friends who cared more about her brain than her appearance. The clock on the kitchen wall showed 7:15 a.m. Sarah gathered her backpack, double-checked her emergency kit, containing wig tape, adhesive, and backup eyebrows, and headed for the door. "Sarah," her mother called out, making her pause. "You know you're beautiful, right? With or without hair, you're the strongest person I know." Sarah felt tears threatening to fall but blinked them back. Crying would ruin her carefully applied makeup. "Thanks, Mom," she managed to say before hurrying out. The walk to school was short, just 3 blocks through their suburban neighborhood. As Sarah approached the imposing brick building of Westbrook High, she observed groups of students hanging out on the front lawn. Girls with long, flowing hair they could flip carelessly over their shoulders. Boys running fingers through their messy locks without fear of exposing anything. Taking a deep breath, Sarah straightened her shoulders and held her head high. She had gotten good at pretending to be confident, at acting like she was just another normal teenager. As she climbed the steps to the main entrance, she repeated her morning mantra: "They can't know unless you let them know. Just keep walking, keep smiling, keep pretending." The heavy doors closed behind her with a thud, marking the beginning of what Sarah hoped would finally be a fresh start. But as she would soon learn, some secrets are harder to keep than others. And sometimes the worst bullies are the ones hiding their own deep insecurities. Sarah's first week at Westbrook High had gone surprisingly well. She found herself enjoying her classes, especially her position as a junior reporter for the school newspaper. The newspaper room became her sanctuary during lunch breaks, where she could work on stories instead of facing the crowded cafeteria. Everything changed on Friday afternoon. Madison Taylor, the cheerleading captain, was holding court at her usual table when Sarah walked past, heading to her locker. Madison was everything Sarah wasn't: tall, confident, with long blonde hair that caught the light as she tossed it over her shoulder. "Hey, You girl, Madison called out, making Sarah freeze mid-step. You're on the paper, right? We need someone to cover the cheerleading championships next week. Sarah turned slowly, clutching her books to her chest. Sure, I can do that. Great. Madison's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Practice is today after school. Don't be late. That afternoon, Sarah sat in the gymnasium bleachers, taking notes as the cheerleaders practiced their routines. The air conditioning was broken and the heat was intense. She kept reaching up to make sure her wig was secure, paranoid about the sweat building underneath. As she watched, Sarah noticed something odd about Madison. Despite her perfect appearance and commanding presence, the cheerleading captain seemed to flinch whenever her co-captain, Jessica, gave her suggestions. There was something familiar about the way Madison's confidence flickered when she thought no one was watching. The practice was nearly over when it happened. A powerful gust of wind blew through the open gym doors, catching Sarah off guard. She felt her wig shift slightly, and in her panic to adjust it, she dropped her notebook. Pages scattered across the floor. Madison walked over, seemingly to help. "Let me get those for you," she said, bending down. But as she stood up, her eyes narrowed. She had noticed something, perhaps a glimpse of the wig's edge, or the way it didn't quite move naturally. Sarah hurried away, but she could feel Madison's gaze following her. That night, she could barely sleep, remembering how Jessica Monroe had looked at her the same way at her old school, right before everything fell apart. The next Monday, Sarah noticed whispers following her through the hallways. Madison had gathered her cheerleading squad during morning practice, and they were watching Sarah with poorly concealed curiosity. During third period, Sarah found an anonymous note in her locker. "What are you hiding under that fake hair?" Her hands trembled as she crumpled the paper, stuffing it into her pocket. At lunch, she retreated to the newspaper room, but for the first time, she wasn't alone. Amy Jean, a quiet senior who handled the paper's photography, was sorting through pictures at the light table. "You okay?" Amy asked, noticing Sarah's distress. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Sarah managed a weak smile. "I'm fine. Just stressed about deadlines." Amy didn't look convinced. "Listen, I know Madison's been asking questions about you. She does this sometimes. Find someone to target when she's feeling insecure. Last year, it was a girl with severe acne." "What happened to her?" Sarah asked, dreading the answer. "She transferred schools," Amy replied quietly, "but you seem stronger than that." Sarah wasn't so sure about that. As she headed to her last class of the day, she spotted Madison with her group of friends, their heads close together as they whispered and giggled. Madison looked up, caught Sarah's eye, and smiled, the kind of smile that promised trouble. Later, at her locker, Sarah overheard two of Madison's friends talking around the corner. "Did you see how fake it looks? Madison says she's probably completely bald under there. Gross. Why would anyone want to hide something like that?" Sarah's vision blurred with tears as she grabbed her books. She had worked so hard to build a normal life here, and now it was crumbling again. Something inside her had changed. She was tired of running, tired of letting bullies dictate her life. As she walked home that afternoon, Sarah made a decision. If Madison was planning something, she would be ready. This time would be different. This time, she wouldn't let someone else's cruelty define her story. What Sarah didn't know was that Madison was already planning something big for tomorrow's lunch period, something that would change both their lives forever. The cafeteria buzzed with its usual lunchtime energy as Sarah made her way to her usual corner table. She had spent the morning fighting the urge to stay home, knowing Madison was planning something. Her mother had noticed her anxiety at breakfast, but Sarah insisted everything was fine. Madison sat at her central table, surrounded by her cheerleading squad. Today, she wore her cheerleading uniform, her blonde hair perfectly styled in a high ponytail. Sarah noticed she kept glancing at her phone and whispering to Jessica, her co-captain. Amy from the school newspaper caught Sarah's eye from across the room and gave her a sympathetic smile. She had tried to warn Sarah earlier that morning that she'd overheard Madison planning something during cheerleading practice, but Sarah had already guessed as much. The cafeteria was more crowded than usual. Sarah noticed several students had their phones out, pointed in her general direction. Her heart began to race, but she forced herself to remain calm as she set her lunch tray down. "Hey, Sarah, Madison's voice rang out across the cafeteria. She was walking toward Sarah's table, carrying her own lunch tray. Mind if I join you? I wanted to talk about that article you're writing about our team. Sarah's throat went dry. This wasn't Madison's normal behavior. The cheerleading captain never left her central table, and she certainly never ate lunch with outsiders. Still, Sarah nodded, not wanting to appear rude. Madison sat down across from her, smiling that same predatory smile she'd been wearing all week. You know, Sarah, I've been watching you since you started here. There's something different about you. The cafeteria had grown quieter. Students at nearby tables were turning to watch the interaction. Sarah's hands began to shake under the table. Madison continued, her voice growing louder. Most new students try to fit in, but you're hiding something, aren't you? Sarah's heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. I don't know what you're talking about, she managed to say. Madison stood up suddenly, pretending to lose her balance. She reached out as if to steady herself, but her hand moved with deliberate precision toward Sarah's head. Everything seemed to happen in slow motion. Sarah felt Madison's fingers grip her wig, and then came the sharp tug. There was a collective gasp from the watching students as Sarah's dark brown wig came away in Madison's hand, revealing her smooth, bald head. The cafeteria fell completely silent. Someone's fork clattered to the floor, the sound echoing in the quiet. Sarah sat frozen, feeling the cool air on her exposed scalp, aware of hundreds of eyes staring at her. Madison stood holding the wig, her triumphant smile faltering slightly as she took in the complete silence. This wasn't the reaction she had expected. She had thought people would laugh, that they would join in her mockery. Sarah's vision blurred with tears, but she didn't run. 4 years of dealing with alopecia had taught her something about strength. She slowly stood up, her legs shaking but her spine straight. The silence stretched on as Sarah faced Madison. In that moment, something unexpected happened. Madison's confident facade cracked, just for a second, as she met Sarah's steady gaze. For the first time, she seemed uncertain. Then, from somewhere in the cafeteria, a chair scraped back. Amy Zhang stood up, phone in hand. I got it all on video, Sarah. Every second of what you just did. More movement followed. A boy from Sarah's English class stood up. Then 2 girls from her math class. Soon, students were rising all around the cafeteria, phones in hand, all having recorded Madison's cruel act. Madison's face paled as she realized her mistake. This wasn't like her previous bullying victories. This time, there was evidence. This time, she had gone too far. Sarah reached out and took her wig back from Madison's limp fingers. But instead of putting it back on, she held it in her hands, looking at it as if seeing it for the first time. 4 years of hiding, of fear, of shame. And for what? The bell rang, making everyone jump. But nobody moved. They were all waiting to see what Sarah would do next. Even Madison seemed rooted to the spot. Her earlier confidence completely evaporated. Sarah took a deep breath. She had a choice to make. She could run and hide, as she had done before. Or she could do something different. Something brave. Something that would change everything. And in that moment, Sarah Chen chose to be brave. The cafeteria remained frozen in silence as Sarah stood holding her wig, facing Madison and the sea of watching faces. The moment stretched like a rubber band pulled too tight, ready to either snap or spring back. Sarah cleared her throat. When she spoke, her voice came out stronger than she expected. My name is Sarah Chen, and I have alopecia universalis. She paused, looking around the room. It's an autoimmune condition where your body attacks your hair follicles. I lost all my hair when I was 12 years old. Students leaned forward, phone still recording. Madison hadn't moved, her face a mixture of shock and growing shame. I've spent 4 years hiding, Sarah continued, her voice gaining confidence. 4 years wearing wigs, drawing on eyebrows, and pretending to be normal. I've changed schools twice because of bullying. But you know what? I'm done hiding. She placed her wig on the lunch table. This isn't something I chose. It's not contagious. It's just part of who I am. And yes, sometimes it's hard. Sometimes I cry when I look in the mirror. Sometimes I wish I could just wake up with hair like everyone else. A girl in the back of the cafeteria raised her hand tentatively. My cousin has alopecia too, she said. She's only 8. She thinks she's a freak. Sarah smiled gently. Tell her she's not a freak. Tell her she's beautiful. Tell her there are millions of people like us around the world, including celebrities and athletes. We're just people who happen to not have hair. More hands went up. Questions began pouring out. Does it hurt? Will your hair ever grow back? How do you draw your eyebrows so perfectly? Sarah answered each question honestly, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders with every response. She noticed some students wiping away tears, while others nodded in understanding. Then Emma Roberts, a quiet girl from Sarah's history class, stood up. She pulled off her beanie, revealing patchy hair loss. I have alopecia areata, she said, her voice shaking. I've never told anyone at school before. I've been hiding it for 2 years. The cafeteria erupted in support of murmurs. Someone started clapping, and soon the whole room joined in. Through it all, Madison stood rooted to the spot, her cheerleading uniform suddenly looking like a costume that didn't quite fit. The phone recordings had caught everything. Her cruel prank, Sarah's brave response, and her own frozen reaction. Principal Stevens appeared at the cafeteria entrance, drawn by the commotion. Emmy quickly approached him, showing him the video on her phone. His face darkened as he watched. Madison Taylor, he called out. My office. Now. Before Madison could move, Sarah spoke again. Wait. Everyone turned to look at her. Madison, I want you to know something. Whatever made you want to humiliate me today, whatever pain or insecurity you're dealing with, it doesn't have to make you cruel. You can choose to be better. Madison's carefully applied makeup couldn't hide her trembling lip or the tears forming in her eyes. For the first time, the cheerleading captain looked small and vulnerable. Principal Stevens placed a hand on Madison's shoulder, guiding her toward the door. As they left, Sarah heard him say, We'll be calling your parents, and there will be serious consequences. The lunch period was almost over, but nobody seemed ready to leave. Emma approached Sarah, still clutching her beanie. Thank you, she whispered. I never thought I'd be brave enough to show people the real me. Sarah reached out and squeezed Emma's hand. Maybe we can start a support group, she suggested, for people who feel different, who are tired of hiding. Amy, still holding her phone, smiled. And I can help spread the word through the school paper. People need to hear stories like yours, Sarah. As the final bell rang and students began reluctantly heading to class, many stopped to talk to Sarah. Some shared their own stories of feeling different or excluded. Others simply wanted to offer support. Sarah looked at her wig, still lying on the lunch table. For the first time in 4 years, she felt no urge to put it back on. Madison's attempt to humiliate her had backfired in the most unexpected way. It had finally set her free. What Sarah didn't know was that this was just the beginning. Her story was about to spread far beyond the walls of Westbrook High, and Madison's cruel prank would have consequences neither girl could have predicted. The next morning, Sarah walked into Westbrook High without her wig for the first time. She had spent an extra 20 minutes perfecting her eyebrow application and adding subtle makeup that enhanced her natural features. Her mother had cried when she came downstairs, but they were tears of pride. The video of yesterday's cafeteria incident had spread through social media overnight. Local news stations had already contacted the school, requesting interviews. Sarah's phone hadn't stopped buzzing with notifications since yesterday evening. As she walked through the hallways, students smiled and waved. Some even complimented her makeup. Emma, no longer wearing her beanie, fell into step beside her. Have you seen this? Emma asked, holding up her phone. The video of Sarah's response to Madison had gone viral, already reaching over 1 million views. You're trending on social media. People are calling you #BaldandBrave. Sarah felt overwhelmed, but also strangely calm. For the first time in years, she didn't have to worry about her wig shifting or someone discovering her secret. The freedom was exhilarating. During first period, Principal Stevens called Sarah to his office. She found 2 local news reporters waiting with him. You don't have to do this, the principal assured her, but your story has touched a lot of people. If you're comfortable sharing it, it might help others facing similar challenges. Sarah agreed to the interview. As she shared her experience, she noticed one of the reporters wiping away tears. The other reporter revealed that his daughter had recently been diagnosed with alopecia, and he had been struggling to help her cope. Meanwhile, Madison sat in the school counselor's office, her usual confidence shattered. Her parents had been called in for a meeting about her behavior. The school had suspended her from cheerleading for a month and mandated counseling sessions. "Can you help us understand why you did it?" the counselor asked gently. Madison's carefully constructed facade finally cracked. Through tears, she revealed how her older sister had always bullied her about her weight when she was younger. She had lost 30 pounds before high school and reinvented herself as the perfect, popular cheerleader. But the insecurity never went away, it just turned into a weapon she used against others. By lunchtime, something remarkable was happening in the cafeteria. Students who had always hidden their differences began speaking up. A junior boy removed his baseball cap, revealing severe psoriasis. A freshman girl talked about her struggle with vitiligo. Each story was met with support and understanding. Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from a famous actress who also had alopecia. She wanted to feature Sarah's story on her social media platforms to raise awareness. Several alopecia support groups had reached out as well, asking her to speak at their events. Emma had started organizing the support group they had discussed. Already, 15 students had signed up. The school newspaper was planning a special issue about embracing differences, with Amy's photos and Sarah's story as the centerpiece. After school, as Sarah packed up her belongings, she found a note in her locker. It was from Madison. "I know saying sorry isn't enough. What I did was cruel and inexcusable. I've been hiding too. Hiding behind perfection and popularity because I'm terrified of being the insecure girl I used to be. Watching you stand up there, being so brave and real, it made me realize how wrong I've been. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know that you've taught me something important about courage and authenticity. Madison." Sarah folded the note carefully and put it in her pocket. She understood something now that she hadn't before. Sometimes the biggest bullies were the ones fighting their own deepest fears. As she walked home that afternoon, Sarah caught her reflection in a store window. She saw a girl with clear eyes, a confident smile, and a smooth, bare head held high. She no longer saw something to hide. She saw strength, beauty, and courage. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from a 12-year-old girl with alopecia who had seen her video. "Thank you for showing me I don't have to be ashamed. You're my hero." Sarah smiled, typing back a response. She hadn't set out to be anyone's hero, but sometimes the most powerful moments come when we simply choose to be ourselves. The world was changing, one story at a time, and she was proud to be part of that change. Little did she know, the biggest changes were still to come. 1 week after the cafeteria incident, Sarah's story had exploded beyond anything she could have imagined. Her video had reached 10 million views, and her inbox was flooded with messages from people worldwide sharing their own stories of alopecia and other conditions. The local news segment featuring her interview had been picked up by national networks. Sarah sat with her mother in their living room, watching herself on the morning news. The headline read, "Teens' Powerful Response to Bullying Inspires Millions." "I never thought being exposed would turn into something this positive," Sarah told the interviewer on screen. "Now I realize that hiding was never the answer. We're all different in some way, and that's what makes us beautiful." At school, the atmosphere had changed dramatically. The support group that Emma and Sarah started, now called Beautifully Different, had grown to 30 members. They met twice a week during lunch, sharing stories and offering encouragement to one another. Even Madison had begun to change. After her month-long suspension from cheerleading, she started attending the support group meetings. At first, she sat quietly in the back, but eventually, she began sharing her own story of past bullying and body image struggles. One afternoon, during the group meeting, Madison stood up with tears in her eyes. "I spent so many years being perfect on the outside while feeling broken inside," she admitted. "Watching Sarah's courage made me realize I was the one hiding, behind makeup, designer clothes, and a mean girl attitude." The school newspaper's special issue became its most read edition ever. Amy's photographs captured students embracing their differences. Emma's patchy hair loss, the junior boy's psoriasis, and others who had found the courage to stop hiding. Sarah's article about living with alopecia was being reprinted in other school papers across the country. A major beauty company contacted Sarah about being part of their new Real Beauty campaign. They wanted to feature her in a nationwide billboard campaign promoting self-acceptance and natural beauty. Sarah's mother cried when she read the email. I just spoke to them, her mother said, wiping her eyes. They want to fly us to New York next week for the photo shoot, and they're offering to start a foundation in your name to help other young people with alopecia. The impact reached beyond just their school. Other schools began starting their own beautifully different groups. Sarah received invitations to speak at schools across the state about bullying, self-acceptance, and the power of embracing one's differences. One morning, Sarah found Madison waiting by her locker. The former cheerleading captain looked different now. She'd stopped wearing heavy makeup and had traded her designer clothes for a more natural look. "I got this yesterday," Madison said, holding out her phone. It showed a message from a girl at another school. "Your story about changing from a bully to an ally gave me the courage to apologize to someone I hurt. Thank you for showing me it's never too late to change." Madison looked at Sarah with genuine emotion. "I never thought my biggest mistake would lead to something good. When I pulled off your wig, I thought I was exposing your weakness. Instead, you showed everyone what real strength looks like." Sarah smiled, remembering the scared girl who had started at Westbrook High just weeks ago. "Sometimes our worst moments lead us to our best selves," she said. That afternoon, Sarah received an email that made her heart skip. The famous actress with alopecia who had contacted her wanted to feature her story in a documentary about breaking beauty standards. The film would share stories of people around the world who had overcome stigma and bullying to embrace their unique appearances. As Sarah walked home that day, she passed the local pharmacy where she used to buy her wig accessories. Through the window, she saw a young girl with alopecia, probably around 10 years old, proudly walking down the aisle without a wig. The girl's mother caught Sarah's eye and mouthed, "Thank you." Sarah touched her smooth head and smiled. The word exposure had taken on a new meaning for her. What was meant to expose her differences had instead exposed something much more powerful, the strength that comes from accepting yourself and the beauty of being authentically who you are. But even as her story continued to inspire others, Sarah had no idea that the biggest challenge to her newfound confidence was just around the corner. 3 weeks after the viral video incident, Madison sat in her final mandatory counseling session, fidgeting with the sleeve of her simple cotton sweater. The past month had transformed her in ways nobody could have predicted. "You've made remarkable progress, Madison," Mrs. Reynolds, the school counselor, said warmly. "Would you like to share your thoughts about the changes you've experienced?" Madison took a deep breath. "When I first came here, I was angry at being punished. But now I understand it wasn't really about Sarah at all. It was about me and my own insecurities." During these sessions, Madison had finally revealed the truth about her home life. Her mother was a former beauty queen who constantly pressured her about maintaining the perfect image. Her older sister had bullied her relentlessly about her weight throughout middle school, leading to an eating disorder that she kept hidden from everyone. "I became what hurt me," Madison admitted, her voice cracking. "I turned into the same kind of bully my sister was, thinking it would somehow make me feel better, but it only made me feel worse." That afternoon, during the beautifully different meeting, Madison stood up to share her story publicly for the first time. Sarah watched from her seat as the former cheerleading captain revealed her struggles with body image, her past eating disorder, and the pressure to be perfect. "My mother still won't speak to me," Madison revealed, wiping away tears. "She says I've ruined our family's reputation by exposing our private matters. But I can't pretend anymore. Sarah taught me that real strength isn't about being perfect, it's about being real." The group responded with overwhelming support. Even students who had once feared Madison now saw her in a completely different light. Emma, who had become one of the group's leaders alongside Sarah, gave Madison a tight hug. However, not everyone celebrated these changes. Jessica, Madison's co-captain, had taken over the cheerleading squad and was determined to maintain the old social hierarchy. She started spreading rumors about Madison's mental health and suggested she had cracked under pressure. During lunch period, Jessica and her followers made a point of walking past Madison's new table, making loud comments about attention-seeking and fake transformations. Madison's hands shook as she tried to ignore them, but Sarah noticed her struggling. "Hey," Sarah said softly, touching Madison's arm. "Remember what you told me about your sister? How her words only had power because you believed them. The same is true now. Jessica only has power if you give it to her." Madison managed a small smile. "It's harder than I thought, being on this side of things. I owe so many people apologies for how I used to behave. Later that day, Madison received an unexpected email. A national eating disorder awareness organization had seen her story in connection with Sarah's viral video. They wanted both girls to speak at their annual conference about the connection between bullying, body image, and the journey to self-acceptance. When Madison showed the email to her mother, hoping for support, she was met with cold disapproval. First, you humiliate yourself by confessing your problems to everyone, and now you want to broadcast them to the whole country, her mother had snapped. I didn't raise you to be weak. But for the first time in her life, Madison didn't crumble under her mother's criticism. Instead, she thought of Sarah's courage and found her own voice. Being honest isn't being weak, Mom. I'm done pretending to be perfect. I want to help other people who are struggling like I was. That evening, Madison sat in her room, looking at old photos of herself. There she was at 12, before the extreme dieting began, smiling genuinely. Then at 14, after losing weight, her smile tight and controlled. And finally, her recent cheerleading photos, where she looked flawless but empty. She picked up her phone and began typing a message to Sarah. I never thought the person I tried to humiliate would end up saving me from myself. My mom still doesn't understand, but for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm becoming who I'm supposed to be. As Madison hit send, she didn't realize that her journey of transformation was about to intersect with Sarah's in an even more meaningful way. The conference invitation was just the beginning of something much bigger, something that would challenge both girls to dig even deeper into their newfound strength. 6 months after the viral video incident, Sarah and Madison stood backstage at the National Youth Empowerment Conference. The auditorium was packed with over 2,000 attendees, including students, educators, and parents from across the country. Ready? Sarah asked, adjusting her sparkly headband. She no longer wore wigs, instead embracing her bare head and decorating it with beautiful accessories. Madison nodded, smoothing her simple black dress. She had chosen an outfit that emphasized comfort over fashion, a change that still surprised people who knew her from before. As ready as I'll ever be. Their presentation, titled From Bullying to Brotherhood, a story of transformation, had become one of the most anticipated sessions of the conference. The viral video that had started it all played on the giant screen as they were introduced. Sarah spoke first, sharing her journey with alopecia and how Madison's attempt to humiliate her had unexpectedly led to liberation. Then Madison stepped forward, her voice trembling at first but growing stronger as she described her own transformation from bully to advocate. The girl who pulled off Sarah's wig that day was hiding too, Madison admitted to the silent audience. She was hiding behind perfectionism, popularity, and cruelty. Sometimes the biggest bullies are the ones fighting the hardest battles inside. In the front row, Madison spotted her mother, who had finally agreed to attend after months of therapy together. Beside her sat Sarah's mother, who had become an unexpected source of support for both girls. The beautifully different movement they had started at Westbrook High had now spread to over 500 schools nationwide. Emma was running their social media accounts, which had millions of followers. Amy's photographs had been featured in a major magazine's special issue about teenage empowerment. After their presentation, during the Q&A session, a young girl with alopecia approached the microphone. Before I saw your video, she said, wiping away tears, I thought I was alone. Now I'm starting a beautifully different group at my school. You changed my life. More students shared similar stories. A former bully talked about how Madison's transformation inspired him to change. A teacher described how the movement had transformed her school's culture. Back at Westbrook High, the change was permanent. Jessica, who had initially mocked Madison's transformation, had gradually lost her influence as more students embraced authenticity over artificial popularity. The cheerleading squad, under new leadership, had become known for its inclusivity. After the conference, Sarah and Madison sat in a quiet corner of the hotel lobby, processing the day's events. Did you ever imagine this would happen? Madison asked, holding her conference speaker badge. That your worst day would turn into something this meaningful? Sarah smiled, touching her bare head. I used to think losing my hair was the worst thing that could happen to me. Now I realize it led me to my purpose. And I thought being perfect was the only way to be valuable, Madison added. You taught me that our imperfections make us real. Their phones buzzed simultaneously. Emma sending updates about their latest initiative. The Beautifully Different Foundation was launching a scholarship program for students who had overcome bullying or medical challenges. Sarah and Madison would serve on the selection committee. As they headed to their rooms that night, they passed a mirror in the hallway. Two girls looked back at them, one confidently bald, the other naturally beautiful without her former mask of makeup. Both smiling, both real. "You know what's funny?" Sarah said, posing at her door. "That day in the cafeteria, you thought you were exposing my weakness. Instead, you helped me find my strength, and somehow, that helped you find yours too." Madison hugged her, tears in her eyes. "Thank you for not letting my worst moment define me, for seeing the scared girl behind the mean one." The next morning, as they prepared to return home, both girls knew this wasn't an ending but a beginning. Their story had sparked a movement, but more importantly, it had taught them and countless others a powerful truth. Sometimes the moments that seem meant to break us are actually the ones that make us whole. Back at Westbrook High, their lockers stood side by side now, both decorated with photos and messages from students they'd helped. Above them hung a banner with the words that had become their movement's motto: "Your difference is your strength, your story is your power." And so, what began as an act of cruelty had transformed into a legacy of healing, proving that sometimes the most beautiful transformations come from our darkest moments. The end.